topic is going to be from Isaiah 55. So if any of you would like to pull up this passage on your phones, I'll go ahead and read it so we can have look into what we're going to talk about today. All right. The compassion of the Lord. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear that your soul may live, and I will make you with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. Behold, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for the peoples. Behold, you shall call a nation that you do not know, and a nation that did not know you shall run to you, because of the Lord your God and of the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress, instead of the brier shall come up the myrtle, and it shall make a name for the Lord, an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. Now I will pass it on to Bob.
In case you haven't gotten a chance to meet me yet, my name is Bob. Like Sophia said, I work for ACF. I'm a student here, graduated in 2021. And before I get started, for the people that I don't know quite as well, and for the people that I do, Jeremy and I have been praying and anticipating and waiting for a long time for the school year to start. And now that we're 3 weeks into the semester, know that y'all are in many ways answered prayers, and hopefully that's weird or like awkward, but I wanted to offer them to you. And so, however long you give us to get the time, we hope that you encounter Jesus here, and that's what our hearts are geared towards. And hopefully, whether it's just tonight or for many more large groups to come and many more ACF events to come, that you encounter Jesus together, that we get to encounter Jesus together. And so, getting into the actual content of the evening. So this week's talk is a little bit of a part 2 from last week, where we went over a little bit of InterVarsity Refresh Proxy. In case you were not here, that is really fine. This talk in many ways, I think, stands on its own, but just to make sure that we are a little bit familiar with kind of what we were talking about last week. So we engage with, amongst other things, this image here. In case you can't quite read the words, it is a reference to John 10:10. It says, I have come to give you the good life, a life that overflows with beauty and harmony. Other translations talk about Jesus giving us life abundantly. And so my goal today is really just to dive into this. Interesting enough, by not talking about this passage, but by talking about another passage. We use this as an outreach tool on campus and just like talk to random people as they were passing through the book the other week. And I think a lot of people, when they came across this promise that Jesus gives us about giving us the good life and something that is overflowing with beauty and harmony, they're like, yeah, that sounds great. But I think one thing that is tricky is that what does that mean and what does that look like? What does the abundant life that Jesus offers us mean for us? And then also, how is it different than other things that promise us similar things? Because I think plenty of things promise us that they'll give us life abundantly or fully. But what is Jesus' promise here, and how is it different than other things that promise similar things? And so, hopefully, if you are new to faith, or even if you've walked with Jesus for a while, something here can be speaking to you. And so, one reason I really love Isaiah 55 is that I think it is actually a very clear picture of like what the abundant life looks like. And another reason that I really love it, it's honestly probably my favorite chapter in all Scripture, is that it gives you honestly the answer from the top. Like in the first 2 verses, it talks about bread and it talks about milk and wine. And I think those images in many ways speak for themselves. Like we all love bread, hopefully, like bread is good. And then I know that not everyone is 21 yet, but wine is also a good thing. But I think these images are worth expanding upon because in many ways they also mean something very powerful to the Israelites who would have read this at the time. And so there are 2 points of our time together today. One is bread for the journey, and second is wine from our grapes. So bread from our journey, wine from our grapes. So to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about bread. So like I said, I love bread. I don't know if other people love bread, but it's a very simple thing, right? Like what it is a little bit of flour and it's a little bit of water and a little bit of bacteria, and then you get bread. And the thing is, like this very simple thing, nonetheless, is like kind of profound, right? When we say something is our bread and butter, what we say is it's a very simple thing that nonetheless like feeds us and nourishes us and sustains us. And I think the first way that Jesus offers us abundant life is by giving us bread that sustains us for the journey. This can be very simple things, like actually physical bread. Like if you're walking somewhere, like you need to eat something, and so therefore, like Jesus gives us physical bread. He also gives us relational bread, right? Like he gives us community and friendships and relationships that we might journey through life together, not alone, but connected to other people. And then of course, he also gives us spiritual bread. That might mean different things to different people, but I think in many ways it's the bread of like reading and praying and encountering God in those spaces that in a lot of ways sustains us and nourishes us spiritually. And so I think part 1 of the abundant life as it relates to bread is this idea that like Jesus gives us something very simple in all those domains. It can be a very simple relationship. It can be a very simple meal that you eat that nourishes you, or it can be a very simple spiritual practice that in many ways nourishes and sustains you. And so part 1, I think, of the abundant life is this very simple object that gives you sustenance. And I think an image that I come back to whenever I think about this is Lord of the Rings. In case no one else here is a Lord of the Rings nerd like I am, I won't bore you with the intricate details. But at a high level, Lord of the Rings is about a journey where some little people called hobbits start out from a place called the Shire, which is a place of tremendous natural beauty, and they're tasked to take a long journey to like the evil lands of Mordor. And along the way, like there are orcs and things that start to kill them. And so in order to start out on this journey, they have a party, and in the party there is an elf, and the elf, Legolas, offers them a bread called lembas, which you can read the quote there, but it's meant to sustain them on the journey there. And it's like a very simple thing. Like the books describe them as like very straightforward, like honey wafers, and so they're sweet and they're meant to keep for a long time, but they're like not super tasty. Like they're a very simple thing that like nourishes them and it keeps them on the journey, but they don't taste great. Lembas is actually a reference back to Old Testament references to manna, so like Tolkien kind of just stole some of the Bible's references of a very similar process when Israel was leaving Egypt. But I think this picture of lembas as like something that Jesus offers us in order for him to sustain us life is something I come back to when I read this passage. In the same way that like you can eat a little bit of lembas, and it says here that you can like keep traveling for many days. Even the tall men of Minas Tirith, which is like the super men of the universe, even they can like eat a little bit and be sustained. And so the first way that I think this passage and Jesus offers us abundant life is through that very simple act of giving us bread that nourishes and sustains sustains us. And so to continue on the thread, I think nonetheless, even though bread is very simple, it's actually something, like I said earlier, that's quite profound. And I think an image that paints this very clearly for me, just to share a little bit of a personal story. Wait, no, just kidding. I'm going to talk about this first. And so like when I read chapter 6, or verse 6, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, the righteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he might have compassion on him, and to our God, that he will abundantly pardon. This set of verses 6 and 7 is talking about forgiveness, which is also in many ways like a simple thing. You do something and then like God forgives you. And I think like for those of us who grew up in church, it seems a very simple thing, but it's actually very profound as well. And so the quote back here about lambas, it says a bit here, for these things are given to serve you when all else fails. When I read verse 6 and 7, I come back to this idea of like forgiveness being a very simple thing that is always there for me, even when all else fails. And so in this like very practical way, right, like that forgiveness is like maybe a symbol of God's bread for us. It's a thing that keeps us sustained and nourished as we are going through the journey and we are weary. Nonetheless, it's something that is very beautiful and very profound. And I think it's made more profound the more you access it. I think in some ways, as I remember being a new Christian and like coming into this like idea of God forgive me for my sin and being like, oh, that's cool. But I think the more and more I journey and the more and more I come back to it, this very simple thing is made more profound each time I need it. And so in the same way that like home cooking becomes more and more special the longer you spend away from home, like the simple acts of bread that Jesus offers us become more profound. And so now actually making the transition, I think. Yeah, okay. God takes ordinary bread and transforms it into something divine. I think the process of taking something simple and making it divine is part 2 of the abundant life. Not only does he give us things that nourish and sustain us, those same things, which are oftentimes very simple, is something that he turns into something divine. And so for me, to share a little bit of a personal story, my favorite food on earth is this like Chinese omelet thing called jianbingguozi in Mandarin. And it's made in these like carts that you will see on the street where they like will roll out these like giant or these carts that have these like giant things of eggs on them, and they'll like make batter, and there's like a hot plate in the middle, and so they'll take this like egg batter and then like spread it around, and then like they'll brush it with like spices and chilies and herbs, and then like put this like crunchy bread in the middle. In a lot of ways, it's like the stuff that you get that's like very cheap. I think you can get one for like 50 cents, and it's like the thing that you eat when you go to to work or to school for the morning. Think like the hot dog cart, but like Chinese. And I bring this up because I think it's a really beautiful picture, at least for me personally, for how God turns something simple into something divine. Because first of all, this stuff is really good. It's like fluffy and crunchy and like herby and spicy all at the same time, and it's like warm and nourishing. But also because my personal attachment to this. So when I eat this dish, it makes me actually think of my family. So this is like my grandparents on the left with my aunt, and then also my parents and my sister. The first time I ate this, I was with my dad in China, and I was like pretty young. I was like 8-ish, and I was a bit of a brat at the time, and like an American brat in China in particular, because like I remember very distinctly, my dad promised me that we would like go to KFC for lunch, even though we were in China and there was like amazing food all around us that was like not American, but like I wanted KFC. But he like grew up eating this, and so like he got one off the street and then like offered it to me, and me and like my 8-year-old wisdom was like resistant to it and was like, no, I don't want this, I want KFC. But then he was like, try some, and then I ate it, and it was really good. And so when I eat this, it reminds me of my family, because like my grandparents like came to know that I really enjoy this. So like when I go back to China, which admittedly it's been a while, but this is like the first thing that they buy for me. And then also I think there's this connection to my dad, because like he grew up also really loving it and kind of like passed it down to me. And so again, this is like, it's like a very simple thing, right? Like it's functionally a hot dog, but like for Chinese people. But it's like this very divine thing as a result, right? And it's nourishing and sustaining for me, not only because of the physical reasons, but then also because there's this connection to something bigger and more divine. And so the first way that Jesus offers us the abundant life is that he offers us something very simple that nonetheless nourishes us, and then takes that very simple thing and transforms it into something that is beautiful and divine and is from him. So, moving on. The second point that I think this passage talks about, and that I think is worth thinking about in terms of the abundant life, is this idea of wine from our grapes. And so, before I unpack what this means, I need to talk a little bit about grapes and wine and how they're connected to one another. So in the passage, there's a little bit of a turning point. There's the first couple of verses where there's talk about bread and wine and milk, and then a little bit about Jesus, and then verse 6 and 7, which we just saw, where there's discussion about Jesus' forgiveness and offering to us. So all of that is kind of the bread part, right? Jesus offered us to us as bread. We come back to it over and over again. But then there's a little bit of a turn in verse 8 and 9 when God is kind of expanding upon his view, offering us Jesus and then telling us the significance of Jesus. And so this is, I believe, verse 10 and 11. And so as the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. And so this is basically how God is saying all the rest of the passage is important things. So pay attention, right? Because he's basically saying that all of this nature imagery is pointing to the rest of the passage. And so this part at the end here that I've highlighted is basically God saying this is my promise to you. And so what comes next in terms of grapes and wine, I think, fits into God's grand plan for the world. And honestly, I think it's very beautiful and important because of that reason. So I'll talk about grapes for a little bit. So Sophia drew this, by the way, when I was I need an image of grapes that fits in with the vibe of the bread template that you found. It's very nice, so give her a round of applause. Literally told her at 1 p.m. She turned it around in half an hour, so great. But anyways, grapes. So grapes in Middle Eastern culture were a symbol of the riches of the land. So if you know anything about how grapes are grown, which I don't expect any of you to, but they're very fickle. So you need the right conditions of soil and rain and humidity and sun in order for grapes to grow. And so as a result, in the Bible, they're often used as a symbol of how the land is in sync with one another. Are the people in the land caring for creation? Are they worshiping and obeying God? And are they treating the land with the respect that it deserves? And if it does, good grapes come out. But if they don't, bad grapes come out. And so when Israel first enters the promised land, a batch of Israelites are sent out, and the way that they know that the land is good is that they discover grapes that they have to string through a pole to carry. So two guys string a bunch of grapes onto a stick and then are walking around, and they're big and they're heavy, and it's a sign that the land is good. But then also in other parts of scripture we see reference to sour grapes or wild grapes, and that in the Middle East is known as poison, because wild grapes, if it's grown in the wrong conditions, are really bad for you. And so grapes are a sign and a symbol of how is the land and how is the life in the land produced. And I think, contextualizing it to our world, we oftentimes hear about the fruit of the Spirit, or the fruit that God creates in us. And I think the image of grapes or the image of fruit results in this idea of there are things in our lives that produce good fruit and that God cultivates and nourishes and sustains us. But then also there are things in us that are quite honestly bad grapes. I think last week y'all talked a little bit about the second slide of the refresh proxy. In case you can't see, the destructive forces in the world, or sin in the world, are the bad grapes. And so on the right here, the words are kind of small, but environmental destruction, racism, international war, greed. It's a little bit of an understatement, but these are kind of the bad grapes of our world, right? And these are the ways in which the ground is cursed, and the things that come out from it, and the fruit that comes out of it, is cursed. And so, of course, these are very grand and big things, but I think in other ways, very personally, when I look at myself and reject the stranger, or am greedy beyond what I should be, or don't steward creation in the way that God calls me to, all of these are also reflections of how these very big picture sins are also made manifest in me through the bad grapes that are cultivated in my soil, right? And so the promise that God gives us in the rest of the passage is that he'll make wine out of it. And so he'll make wine out of our bad grapes. And so there's also a little bit of symbolism around wine. The process of making wine is kind of a symbol for God's promise. because the process of like making and maintaining a vineyard is like very expensive. Like you have to like set up this like these growing conditions for your orchards. You have to like set up the industrial process for making wine, and it's oftentimes many years before you start turning a profit. And because like vineyards are very valuable, you also have to like protect it. You have to like hire watchmen, and so there's a very important like passage in Isaiah 5 that actually we studied last week in a small group. Shout out to Mia. That talks about this. And so whenever you see like vineyards and wine, it's a symbol of God's promise that like I will make something in you, you being Israel during the time of Isaiah, but then now I think like in each and every one of us, that is beautiful, right? And the promise I think here is that God will make wine from our bad grapes. And so actually so this is the promise piece. The way that I actually see this in the passage is towards the end in 12 and 13 when he's talking about junipers growing out from where thorn bushes used to be and myrtles growing out from where briars used to be. Briars and thorn bushes are like also things that grow off of bad soil. And so like when the soil is bad and when like plants have choked up the nutrients, what is produced is thorn bush and briars. But if you read the promise here, it's saying that like junipers will grow where thorn bushes used to be and myrtles will grow where briars used to be. And so in other words, in the theme of the evening, God will turn our bad grapes into wine. And so wine in this context is something that was always at celebrations. It comes up oftentimes in the New Testament as something that, when enjoyed in the right context, is a symbol of like the fruit of the land being turned into something even more glorious. And so when God promises to take junipers and have them grow out of places where thorn bushes used to be, and take the places where briars used to be and create myrtles out of them, it's the process of taking bad grapes and turning it into wine. God promises that he'll turn the grapes of our lives and turn it into wine. And what I mean by this is like, I think, sometimes you go through these seasons in life where like life is just like really hard. And sometimes it's like things people do to you. Sometimes it's like just life turning around and like there are things to be cursed. And sometimes like you don't come out of those seasons producing fruit in the way that maybe you would like to. Sometimes like you face difficult things and you don't respond in the right ways. But the promise I think that God gives us in this passage, and I think one of the really important pieces of the abundant life is that God promises that wine will be made out of those things. And I think this is also like one of the ways in which Jesus' promise of abundant life is quite different from other things. And this image I think captures it very beautifully. What we see here is that from the desert, there is like greenery and flowers and life showing up. And so the promise that Jesus, I think, gives us when it comes to the abundant life, that is, I think, very specifically special to Jesus' message, is that he will enter the things that are dead and that are broken. He'll enter into the bad grapes and turn that specifically and use it to turn into wine. Making wine not despite of our brokenness, but through our brokenness, right? And if you think a little bit about like how wine is grown, you take grapes, you crush them and you smash them, and they like rot in a very specific way, and so those things die, so that wine might be made. And so the promise that I think Jesus offers us, just to recap, is that we will have the very simple things in our lives be things that nourish us and sustain us. He promises us also that he will turn those things into something divine, that the very simple relationships or the very simple things or the very simple like places or people in our lives that we might not appreciate at first blush, those will be made into something divine. And then even the things in our lives that are broken and bad, those bad grapes that are a sign of sin in the world, he'll turn those things into wine. And you'll enter into that where there's death and turn that into life. And so I leave you with these images and hope that they paint a picture of the abundant life that is beautiful and glorious in the same ways that those things were beautiful and glorious to me. Would we all share richly in the life that